Immanentization, which is his own term, it means to merge the concepts of secularization and modernization. The multiplicity of centers and the fragmentation of nature are signs of the move from the solid, logocentric stage of modernity to its liquid state of materialist irrationalism and anti-heroism. We've left behind us not only Prometheus and Faustus, he says, but also Frankenstein's monster. We've now Madonna and Michael Jackson instead of Dracula. We have now Derrida. Unquote. The very last short phrase views Derrida in an extremely negative light. It's Elmessiri's harsh critique of the philosophical deconstructionist notions of the unstable meaning and the unworthiness of language. If we move to Chomsky, in his Cartesian linguistics, he deconstructs behavior's theory and its focus on experience as a determining factor. He ironically dismantles the absurdity of the theory that our mind is a clean sheet, as though we obtained our mental faculties from the objects themselves. In Reflections on Language, Chomsky explains that he has been particularly interested in proving that language is a mirror of the mind, not in the simplest traditional sense, but as a product of human intelligence created anew and afresh in every individual by operations that lie far beyond the reach of will or consciousness. Chomsky, like in Messiri, deconstructs the behaviorist conditioning theories that involve eliciting reflexes in a rigorous training process, reminiscent somehow of Pavlov's dog experiment, and the language acquisition theory that depends on inscriptions on the otherwise blank slate of the mind. In his Cartesian linguistics, Chomsky highlights the urgent need to focus on, quote, the fact that the speaker of a language knows a great deal that he has never learned, and that his normal linguistic behavior cannot be possibly accounted for in terms of stimulus, control, conditioning, generalization and analogy, patterns and habit structures, or dispositions to respond, in any reasonably clear sense of these such abused terms. As a result, a fresh look has been taken not only at language structure, but at the preconditions for language acquisition, and at the perceptual function of internalized rules. Chomsky sets out to discover the abstract principles that are universal by biological necessity and not mere historical accident, that derive from mental characteristics of the species. Chomsky starts explaining how it's far-fetched to think that a child would so easily, and at such a young age, and in a short period of time, master not only vocabulary, but also grammatical rules and even exceptions to them. A normal child acquires this knowledge on relatively slight exposure and without specific training. He can then quite effortlessly make use of an intricate structure of specific rules and guiding principles to convey his thoughts and feelings to others, arousing in them novel ideas and subtle perceptions and judgments. For the conscious mind, not specifically designed for this purpose, it remains a distant goal to reconstruct and comprehend what the child has done intuitively and with minimal effort. End of quote. By probing language acquisition together with studying the properties of natural languages and human mental faculties, Chomsky, as he himself explains in his Cartesian linguistics, arrives at a revival of the harmony of linguistics and cognitive psychology. A focus on the theories of universal grammar, the creative aspect of language use, as well as a model for competence and performance, common to a great extent in human languages. Chomsky deconstructs earlier theories of personality development, behavior patterns, and cognitive structures that overlook the human genetic predisposition and focus only on the huge role played solely by the social environment. Evidence, he maintains, would never do justice to the rich and complex system of language acquisition and linguistic universals. Universal grammar, as defined by Chomsky, resolves the above-mentioned nature-nurture conflicting theories of language acquisition. There is evidence suggesting that, quote, deep-seated formal conditions are satisfied by the grammars of all languages, end of quote. He traces this notion back to Cartesian linguistics. The central doctrine of Cartesian linguistics is that the general features of grammatical structure are common to all languages and reflect certain fundamental properties of the mind. Again, in a text reminiscent of both Messiri and cognitive psychology, Chomsky stresses the difference between construing intuitive knowledge and conscious learning. Quote, "Such universal conditions are not learned. Rather, they provide the organizing principles that make language learning possible, that must exist if data are to lead to knowledge. By attributing such principles to the mind as an innate property, it becomes possible to account for the quite obvious fact that the speaker of a language knows a great deal that he has not yet learned." End of quote. The linguist's knowledge of the acquired grammar helps the formulation of empirical hypotheses regarding the internal structure of the language acquisition device, explains Chomsky, linking cognitive psychology and philosophy to linguistics. As mentioned earlier, another universal aspect is the creative aspect, common in all languages. This similarity is highlighted in Chomsky's Aspects of the Theory of Syntax. Thus, an essential property of language is that it provides the means for expressing indefinitely many thoughts and for reaching appropriately in an indefinite range of new situations. End quote. In his groundbreaking Aspects of the Theory of Syntax, Chomsky discusses concepts like generative and transformational grammar, and this book makes it easier to construe the relationship between the theory of language acquisition and notions like competence and deep structure. Competence is the speaker-hearer's knowledge of his language, while performance is the actual use of language in correct situations. Generative grammar is a system of rules that assigns structured description to sentences. In other words, generative grammar comprises both the figurative use of language rules as well as the concord of thought and expression in a creative range of new situations expressed by all languages. It provides an explicit analysis of the speaker's contribution and explicit formulation of syntactic processes. Analyzability, adds Chomsky, is the basic predicate in terms of which the theory of transformational grammar is developed. Every speaker has internalized and mastered a generative grammar that expresses his intuitive knowledge of language and its rules. The key words here are intuitive and internalized, because the mental processes are far beyond the actual or even potential consciousness. Hence, the name mentalism some critics like to attach to Chomsky's theories. This was just a short presentation of my much longer paper entitled The Fateful Triangle, Hermeneutically Deconstructed, a comparative reading of language, media and politics in Noam Chomsky and Abdelwahab Elmessiri. Thank you.